I keep seeing things from people saying to me that the prices on StubHub are coming down a little bit on the fight, but I haven't paid close attention to what the prices are since they went on sale. But I have to tell you a funny thing, because you just mentioned the crazy prices on the tickets. I ran into a guy yesterday at the MGM outside as I was walking to the media area, and he came over to me. I guess he had recognized me. He was all excited about being here. He comes from England. So we were talking a little boxing, and I said, well, let me ask you a question. You came all the way from England. Are you actually going to the fight? He was like, yeah, I'm going to the fight. I said, really? How'd you get tickets? He said, I got a ticket. He says, you want to know how much it cost? He was proud of this, and he showed it to me, like the receipt he had. He paid for one ticket. He came here by himself. It's not like he came with his buddies. $17,500 for a ticket, and it's a pretty good seat. So it's a little bit crazy right now.
Dan, what's at stake between these two guys right now? It's being called, one of the biggest fights of the century, the biggest fight of all time. What's at stake in this fight on Saturday night?
Really, there's three things that are at stake in terms of forget the money part of it. Just in terms of the sports part of it, the boxing part of it. A, they're unifying welterweight titles, which is small potatoes compared to the rest of the stuff. B, the winner of the fight universally and clearly will be regarded as the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Right now, everybody believes it's Floyd Mayweather. Pacquiao on most people's list is number 2. But this is 1 versus 2, and will establish who's the number 1 fighter in boxing today. And more importantly, and this is for the history of boxing, the winner of this fight will be the king of this era. They have been the 2 best fighters in the world for a long time. They have fought consistently in the same weight classes. They have defeated 5 common opponents, all of whom are probably destined for the Hall of Fame. Oscar De La Hoya was already in the Hall of Fame. Ricky Hatton, Juan Manuel Marquez, Shane Mosley, and Miguel Cotto. That's a monster star power. They've all beaten those guys, and now they're fighting for the king of the era designation, if you will. It's the legacy fight. That's what this is. This is the legacy fight, like it was for Ali and Frazier, like it was for Hearns and Leonard, like it was for any number of rivals you've seen through the sport's history.
Dan Rafael, ESPN boxing analyst in Vegas for the fight. One question is, Marquez knocked out Pacquiao cold. Mayweather came out of jail and had his way with him for the most part. Do we learn anything from that common opponent in this fight?
I don't think so, and I say the reason why. Number one, Marquez did knock Manny Pacquiao out, but let's not forget, Pacquiao also still has 2 victories against him and a draw, although all 3 of those previous fights were very, very close and somewhat controversial. But the fact of the matter is Pacquiao has 2 victories against him. Another important factor is sometimes in boxing, guys just are made for each other. They have each other's number in a certain sense. Look at Muhammad Ali and Muhammad Ali and Kenny Norton. Kenny Norton, not a great all-time heavyweight, but he gave Muhammad Ali a lot of trouble in their fights where Muhammad Ali, beat all kinds of great guys. And another factor, in the fight with Marquez, people kind of forget about this. Yes, he had come out of a long layoff and out of a retirement when Mayweather fought. He didn't come out of jail to fight Marquez. He had come out of a retirement to fight Marquez. He didn't make the weight. He didn't try to make the weight. He had negotiated a certain catch weight for the fight. I believe the catch weight was 144 pounds. He came in at 146 pounds, and he simply paid Marquez an extra $600,000 to go through with the fight. So I'm not saying that 2 pounds was going to make a difference in the outcome of the fight, but Floyd didn't have to suffer to make the weight. And so it might have been a fight where if he had suffered to make the weight, he wouldn't have been as quick or as agile or been able to do as many things. And Marquez may have won at least some of the rounds of the fight. So that fight, although a good win for Mayweather, I have to give it a slight little asterisk to it. So all that said, I don't think you can draw much conclusion from the way they performed against those common opponents. And also one other thing, when Marquez knocked Manny Pacquiao out, and I'm not taking anything away from Marquez, it was a great knockout. It was the knockout of the year, and it's a great, great victory for an all-time great fighter. But let's be honest, Manny Pacquiao was kicking his butt right before that knockout. He did get caught, and it counts, but it wasn't like he got dominated in the fight. He was winning easily against Marquez in that fight.
Yeah, and how far do you look at, I think is Pacquiao, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, he's 2-3 in his last 5 fights, correct?
Say that again,
Pacquiao. Pacquiao is 2-3 in his last 5 fights, is that correct?
I don't think that's correct. And the other thing about that, there's the loss to Marquez, which is, that's definitely a significant loss. But he has an official loss to Timothy Bradley in their first bout.
Right.
But other than the 2 blind judges that gave the fight to Bradley, you can't find a man, woman, or child on the planet Earth that thinks that Manny Pacquiao can win that fight. That was, in my opinion, one of the single worst decisions in the history of boxing. Maybe up there with the Lennox Lewis versus Evander Holyfield draw, or the Chavez versus Pernell Whitaker draw. But at least those were draws. This was a loss that took away Manny Pacquiao's title. I think you can make a strong argument that was the single worst decision in the history of boxing.
By the way, I said 2-3. I meant 3-2.
Oh yeah, I think you're right about that. Because after he beat After the loss against Marquez, he did come back and has won fights. He'd just come off a fight in November, for example, where he knocked Chris Algieri down 6 times and looked really, really strong in that fight. He had the rematch with Timothy Bradley where he beat him fairly easily. He ran roughshod, shut out against Brandon Rios, who's a good fighter, a former world title holder as a lightweight. So the knockout is certainly significant, but the Bradley loss I don't even regard whatsoever. I thought, listen, you know what? When I was at the Bradley first fight, I scored the fight off the top of my head. I believe I scored that fight 11 rounds to 1 for Manny Pacquiao. Now, I may not be a perfect judge, but I didn't get the fight wrong by 11 rounds.
Dan, in the 5 years that people have been waiting for this fight, whose skills have deteriorated more?
That's an interesting question, and that's one of the reasons why I think that the fight is still a highly competitive fight, because I think that both guys have eroded around the same rate. Pacquiao obviously is slowed down a little bit, and the knockout is part of that. Mayweather, his defensive brilliance has been his calling card. If you look at the raw statistical information, he's been getting hit much more than previous fights, although still tremendous defensively. He's getting hit much more than he ever did. So I think both of their skill sets have reduced at least a little bit, but still not to the level where they can't be declared the 2 best fighters in boxing.
What is it like out there in Vegas? Is it slow to build up, or are you already seeing that this town is going to be taken over by boxing fans?
Put it like this. Normally, it does build. You come in, it's kind of quiet. It builds up. Wednesday, they have the press conference. Thursday, it gets a little more crazy. By Friday, it's pandemonium because of the weigh-in and the fans have rolled in who are coming for the weekend. And then by Saturday, it's like a bonfire. For this fight, it was a bonfire on Tuesday. The casino was loaded. The signage is everywhere. The media descended on Las Vegas on Tuesday. A lot of times the press, guys don't show up until maybe Wednesday, maybe Thursday. I walked into the media center on Tuesday, and there were people that had already gotten here Monday. The only reason I didn't come here Monday is because I had been on the road for 3 weeks, and I was in New York covering the Klitschko fight, and I came home because I wanted to attend my son's birthday party. But which, that's important. But, the press was already here early in the week, and you know how big it is. Now, if you're familiar with the way the setup is at the MGM Grand, where I've been coming to cover fights for, 15, 16 years, there's these 2 giant ballrooms, A and B, that are on the main level just near the entrance to the arena. That's typically the main media center where everybody does their business for the week. Broadcast, radio, television, internet, print media, we're all in these 2 big giant rooms. But this fight is so gigantic and there's so much media that they took those 2 ballrooms, and now it's strictly for the broadcast and for the television, television and radio. And they built a temporary tent with air conditioning and very nice out back of the arena, like giant tent for the print and the internet media. So there's 2 giant press rooms. That's how much media is here for this fight.
Dan Rafael, ESPN.com, covering the fight in Vegas. Obviously, the hype is huge. You mentioned, obviously a lot of people have mentioned that 5 years ago it might have even been bigger. I don't know if it could have been bigger 5 years. This 5 years might have brought it up there to a bigger hype, but will it live up to the hype now 5 years later? Well,
it's definitely bigger now than it would have been 5 years ago. Whether it can live up to the hype, boy, that you just don't know. When I judge fights, and I've said this many times, there's 2 ways you judge a fight. If you're looking at the fight on paper before the fight, how you think it's going to be, if it's an A-level matchup and you're excited about it, that's one thing. And then there's the outcome of the fight. You can have fights that are incredibly great on paper. Let me give you an example. Trinidad De La Hoya, can't miss fight on paper. In the ring, it was a dud. It was a terrible fight. And that happens. And sometimes there's fights you see on paper where you're just sort of ambivalent about it. You're like, whatever, not the greatest matchup in the world. And I'll give you another example. Timothy Bradley Jr. against Ruslan Provodnikov a couple years ago. It was an okay fight, but there was nobody beating the doors down and excited and all jacked up about that fight. And guess what? They put on an absolute war and it won the Fight of the Year award. And so it totally exceeded the expectations. So there's 2 ways to look at it. In Pacquiao Mayweather, the hype is gigantic. If the fight can be halfway decent even and partially live up to the hype, I think we're ahead of the game. I don't think it's possible for it to be people to come in with the massive expectations and to leave thinking it's the greatest fight they ever saw. And it concerns me because I think people who don't watch a lot of boxing are thinking to themselves, we may see Hagler Hearns, or even Hagler or Hearns Leonard. That's just not the way that Floyd Mayweather fights. If you're expecting a war in this fight, then you just don't know who Floyd Mayweather is and you don't follow boxing closely. I want to try to dampen those kinds of expectations. It can still be an excellent fight, but if you think it's going to be World War III, you're sadly mistaken.
Dan, obviously, the 2 guys are getting older, so will we ever see a rematch because of where they are in their careers?
You never say never. Floyd made the point at his media availability yesterday afternoon. Somebody asked him about that because he still will have one bout left on his Showtime contract after this fight. He says, and he's reiterated this because he said it plenty of times before, that he plans to retire at the end of that contract, where he'd be 49-0 if he were able to win tomorrow and then win one more fight, he says, in September, which would be the final bout of that agreement. But look, he's entitled to change his mind. I think in his own head, he thinks he's done when the contract is over, and he also said he wouldn't have it. There would be no rematch. But he's a human being. He's entitled to change his mind like we all are.
No doubt.
So you can't really say until the fight's over with.
All right, give us your opinion on how this fight will go and who you like to win the fight ultimately, Dan.
I have said from day one and back in 2009 when they talked about this fight in the first place that, in my mind, I never said it publicly until the fight was made for this one, but I always felt like Mayweather had enough to win a decision. I haven't changed my mind. I haven't picked against Mayweather since the fight he had in 2001 here at the MGM, also against Chico Corrales. And I just still think that Floyd has enough in his tank, has the best defensive moves, has, can match Pacquiao for speed, and just has too much intelligence and has always found a way to win, where, once again, in a good competitive fight, I believe, Floyd will eke out a decision.
What is the next great fight? Is there one out there after this? Can this propel us to something maybe not as big, but something exciting?
Look, boxing is loaded with great fights and great matchups, possibly, and great fighters. That's just that the public doesn't know them as well as they know Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather over all these years. But there's lots of interesting fights. Canelo Alvarez, he lost to Mayweather, yes, in a pretty one-sided fight, but he's a very exciting young fighter. He's got a test of a fight coming up in a couple weeks against James Kirkland. They're fighting, and there's going to be 40,000 people there at Minute Maid Park in Houston. That's not the big mega fight, but Canelo is going to be around in pay-per-view events for years to come, it seems to me. You also have other exciting fighters. Gennady Golovkin, one of the middleweight title holders, very exciting fighter, very appealing personality, tremendous amateur background, Olympic silver medalist, monster puncher, one of the best in boxing. He's going to be involved in some big fights if somebody will ever be willing to get into the ring with him. There's some other young guys that are on the rise who've been getting great exposure through the new series that has been running on NBC in primetime boxing. A kid named Keith Thurman, a welterweight, undefeated, extremely appealing personality, good look, exciting fighting style, just came off a big win against Robert Guerrero. He may get, I believe, that whatever happens if Mayweather wins on Saturday, that I think that Keith Thurman might be the guy that gets Floyd Mayweather in his final fight in September. He's a guy that can become involved in some major fights. You have the American heavyweight, Deontay Wilder, who has one of the belts, who's undefeated, 33-0 with 32 knockouts. There's the possibility he may fight Vladimir Klitschko down the road for all the marbles at heavyweight. And those are just a couple examples. But if you go through the various weight classes, there's a lot of really good fighters and exciting fights. It's just a matter of the boxers and their managers and the promoters and the networks getting together and actually making those matches. But we're in such a great stretch of boxing right now. This is my fourth fight in a row on the road. I've got two more after this, and every single one of those cards has been a good show.
Dan Rafael, ESPN.
And two more that will be a good show.
Well, we hope. And you wonder if boxing is taking notice of all the hype and all the coverage and everything surrounding this and knowing we can't mess this up. We got to put on a good show, and we want to build off it and continue to do good things because, there's an opportunity, it looks like, with what's going on in MMA. They're getting some bad publicity.
I don't look at boxing's health and survival as it relates to MMA, nor do I think that people should look at MMA and their health and survival as it relates to what's going on in the field of boxing. They're different sports. I respect the athletes and the guys and the fans that like MMA. I consider myself a mild MMA fan. I watch occasionally. I've been live once, and I had a good time. But I don't think that one has to do with the other so much because I've met lots of people who are fans of both sports, and they both have their shares of ups and downs. There's been bad times in boxing, bad times in MMA. I know they're going through some rough stretches right now with some of their star fighters having issues of varying degrees, but that happens in boxing too. So, it always goes in cycles.
Dan Rafael, ESPN.com's got plenty more coverage on the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight, and he is live in Vegas. Dan, it's always a pleasure to catch up on the sweet science.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.